Hello everyone, I'd like to thank you for joining me for this TEKLYNX Label Batch Converter training webinar. Today we'll be going through the process of converting labels from a version of LabelView from previous to version 9 to a version of LabelView after version 9. So, for instance, for the purposes of this example, we'll be doing a conversion of labels created in version 8.6 of LabelView, and we're converting them so they can be used within the LabelView 2012 software. Now, because there's so many varieties of a conversion that are possible, say for instance a conversion from version 6 into version 10 or version 7 into version 9, because there's so many different varieties, for the purpose of this training, we're going to focus solely on the 8 to 2012 conversion. But the process for all the other conversion types would be very, very similar. So just because I'm referring to a conversion process from version 8 to 2012, I don't want you to think that you can't do a conversion from, say, version 6 into version 10. Now, the catch to that is you cannot do a conversion from any version previous to version 6. So no version 4, no version 5. Unfortunately, it's just too old. We weren't able to build a converter that could go that far back. If you do have labels from that old of a software, well, the best suggestion that we can make is to actually recreate the labels manually in the new version of the software. If you need assistance with that, TEKLYNX does offer a service with that, service for that, but it is unfortunately a charged service. So you just want to give a call to our customer service department to see about looking into assistance with that conversion. Alternatively, we have seen some success with taking labels and saving them, doing a save as in, say, a version 8.6 software. So if you have a version 5 or version 4 label, open it, install the demo of version 8.6, open it, and do a save as of that label in 8.6. That will essentially take that version 5 label and turn it into an 8.6 label. Once it's an 8.6 label, you'll be able to use it in the converter and bring it forward into, say, something like 2012. All right, well, that covered, I do want to just go ahead and start off by showing you exactly how we can launch the batch converter. The batch converter is, of course, available from the Start menu. If you click the Start menu, you can go to All Programs, and under All Programs, you're going to come down and find the Label View, the new TEKLYNX Label View 2012 in this case. And underneath that category, you'll see Label View Converter. Now, if we click the Label View Converter, it will launch. Sometimes it takes a second, especially if it's the first time launch. So if it is the first time you're launching the software, just give it a few seconds to load up, but eventually it should come up. Now, alternatively, if you have the LabelView software itself open, LabelView 2012 open, you can go to the Tools menu, and under the Tools menu, you'll also see a shortcut for the batch converter. It'll take you right to the same exact place. Okay, so this is the LabelView batch converter. The batch converter is made up of basically 5 different tabs. You'll see across the top here a source, labels, destination, options, and processing. A batch conversion process is a relatively simple process. It consists of starting off by selecting the label files that you wish to convert. That is the source. Then you can go through and define specifically which labels you want to convert, be it 1 or 2 labels within a directory or all of the labels within a directory. That's the Labels tab. The Destination tab is saying, hey, where do I want the new labels to be created? And then there is an Options tab where we will talk about some of the granular features and granular options that you can define to help manage the conversion process. A lot of important details there we'll cover. And then, of course, the Processing tab, which is actually where the conversion of the labels takes place. Okay? So, now, it is a relatively simple process, but even though it is a simple process, I don't want anyone ever to assume that everything will go off flawlessly. You always want to keep your existing environment in place until you get through a conversion. It is a conversion process, so you want to make sure that you go through the process and make sure that everything that you converted convert successfully before you try to implement it. If you just assume everything's going to work out, of course, that's when something's going to go wrong. Now, the conversion process does have a fairly high success rate. It's usually in the high 90%. So it's got a very good track record for having a successful conversion when it's done properly. But again, it is a conversion process, so there's always a chance something could go wrong. So keep that in mind. Keep that existing environment in place until you do the conversion and until you know everything's working great. Test, retest, triple test the new environment before you decide to implement it. Okay, it's just a safe route to take. I'm not saying that you're going to run into problems. It's just a safe process to follow. Okay, so here we are on the Source tab. The Source tab is where we select, like I said, where we select where the label files are that we want to convert. Now you'll see there's a whole different variety of options here saying scan the existing label view folder. Existing label view folder is referring to the folder it's basically the default folder for labels in the old version of the software. Excuse me. So what it'll do is it'll look at that original default folder and scan that default folder. If when you designed your labels you saved them to the default location that label view usually uses, that might be good enough for you. But if you tend to save in different locations, like on map network drives and uh, anywhere, if you put it in your My Documents folder, if you put it on a different drive, you've got these different options to come through and pick and choose. Now I want to convert the samples directory. I'm going to use the Label View Samples directory from Label View 8. Now what I could do is just choose the existing Label View folder directory here, and it would scan the existing Label View folder and automatically find those sample files because they're actually in the existing Label View folder. But I want to show you the process of being able to pick a specific folder. So I'm going to say scan a selected folder here. If I choose scan a selected folder, you'll see it's got a path I can type into here, and you can type in the path if you choose to, but it's a little bit easier if you just click the Browse button here. The Browse button will bring up a Browse for Folder directory, and within here you can kind of browse through and find the directory that you want to look in. So I'm going to go to Users, Public Documents, TEKLYNX. I want TKI. Label View, the old Label View folder, and then we've got our samples directory right there. Okay. Now there's a bunch of subfolders in here, but you know what? I want to look at everything within the samples folder. So I'm not going to come in here and pick a subfolder. I'm just going to choose the main samples folder. Okay. If I hit OK, you can see it automatically populates that path in there for me. All right. Again, a whole bunch of different options in here that you could use if you wanted to. But if you know where your labels are located, you can just choose to scan a specific folder and browse to exactly where that folder is located. Now, to move forward, we could either choose the Labels tab up here or click the Files to Convert button down in the bottom right-hand corner. Both will take you to the same location. Okay, so if I hit the Files to Convert button, you'll see here it does a quick scan, and it looked in that specific folder. You can see the subdirectories. It drilled down to the samples directory, and then it's finding all of the files within that samples directory. Okay, so you can see up here it says it's found a total of 57 labels. Now this is kind of a good point, a good spot to point out that you may have hundreds and hundreds of labels. The first time you go through a batch conversion, it's usually a good idea to just try and convert a few labels. You want to kind of feel out the conversion and make sure that you get all the settings ironed out and everything's looking correct before you go through and you try to convert everything all at once. Okay, so you know what? It found 57 labels here, but I don't want to do all 57 of my labels because that could take a little while. I just want to see how everything works out to start out with. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down, and you know what? I don't need any of these compliant samples right now. I'm just going to uncheck that checkbox, and all of the subfolders under that compliant samples directory will be deselected. Okay, so now I'm down to, well, it looks like maybe a dozen labels or so. Okay, so we've got a dozen labels here ready to be converted. Now if I click on the Acme parts list here, you can see a little preview over here of the what that label looked like in version 8. And this is actually another spot. It's kind of value to point out that it's very important to have the old version of the software installed on the computer that you're doing the conversion. Now, if you have the ability to do this conversion on the computer that you actually used the old version on, it usually works out a little bit better because that old version's already set up, it already works, and the converter depends on a old version of the software that's going to work. That's where it's going to pull all its conversion details from. So if you have the ability to put this new software and this this converter on the same computer that you used to print labels in the old version on, that will give you the best results. If you can't do that, that's fine, but it is important to at least install an older version of the software. Usually get the best performance if you download and install a demo copy of the LabelView 8.6 software. It's available on our website. Having that software installed will really give the batch converter the tools it needs to be able to do a successful conversion. If you are doing it on a different computer, there are a number of dependent files and things like that that you may need to copy over, which we'll cover in a few minutes here. But the important thing to note here is that having the old software available will really help with the conversion process. Okay, right now it's opening a preview of what this label looked like in the version 8 software. If we didn't have the version 8 software installed, it wouldn't be able to let us know what this preview would look like. So that's where this is that's where the value of having that old version installed comes from. Okay, so we came through and selected the labels that we needed. There are some filter options here and change view options. If you have passwords, you can actually specify passwords right here so that it'll input the passwords before it does the conversion to make sure that it has the permission it needs. But I don't have any passwords, so I don't need to worry about that. Okay, I'm gonna hit the next option, destination, or again the destination option down here. Destination is now choosing where the new label files, the new converted label files, are going to be created. Now by default it's selected to say save converted labels into their original folder and overwrite the current labels and create a backup of them. So basically what it's saying is we're going to take the old files, rename them to have a different backup extension, and then we're going to create new labels with the same name as the old label in the exact same location. Now, that is one option, but to be totally honest, I don't really recommend it. The reason I don't recommend it is because if something goes wrong, it now has basically eliminated those old version labels. They're still there, but they have a different extension. And if you have dozens and dozens of labels, if you needed to do a conversion again, you'd have to go through and rename all of the extensions on those old files. So while this is convenient if everything goes successfully, just as a little extra insurance, I usually recommend not overwriting your old files and actually choosing a new directory to put them in. Okay, you can say, the new 2012 folder. That's fine, you can do that if you want, but usually what I do is actually create a new dedicated folder for my LabelView 2012 files to be created in. Since I created a specific dedicated folder for this, I can choose a specific selected folder and browse to where that folder is located. I put it right on my desktop, and it's called, Samples for LabelView 2012. Okay. And you notice there's a checkbox here that says Keep Subfolder Structure. Now what that means is when it does the conversion, there's subfolders in the directory. There may be subfolders in the directory that I selected. If you choose this checkbox, it's going to retain that structure when it converts. It's usually a good idea to keep that in place, just so that if you had a specific organization before, you'll have that same organization afterward. Okay. So once we've chosen where it's going to go, we can move on over to the Options tab. The Options tab is actually probably one of the most important aspects of the conversion process, and this is what people tend to kind of jump past because they don't think it's all that important. Skipping this step will be the root cause of most troubles that people have. Okay, The first option in here is what's known as the location of linked files. Now, in the version 8 software, the software depended very heavily on linked files. Things like images, text files, counters, things like that. It needed to know where these linked or external files were located in order for it to work, in order for it to pull in those fields. Now, because the old software depended on it, the batch converter has to depend on it as well. So if you had pictures that were saved in external locations, the batch converter needs to know where that external location is so that it can convert it into the new software. That's what this location of linked files is. Now, if you click on this location of linked files, you're going to see a list of file locations. Now, if you were familiar with LabelView 8 or previous, if you went to options and directories in LabelView 8, you would see a list of default folders, default directories. These are those default directories that you're seeing right here. Now this comes back to if you have the ability to do it on the computer that you originally produced labels on, it will really help out because you have this reset all button up here. If you hit the reset all button, what it's going to do is it's going to look at the version 8 or version 7 software, whatever you might have, and say, hey, how is that currently configured? Where is the version 8 software looking for its picture files, its accumulator files, its pick lists, its text files? Where is that software looking? And if that software is working correctly right now, then it's looking in the right spot. So then it pulls that information in and automatically fills these fields. Now, if you can't do it on the original computer, that's fine. However, if you're using these types of files, you will need to copy them over to the new computer and then manually define where those locations are. Okay, there's a browse button here, so you don't have to type in the location. You can actually browse to the location, but you do need to define specifically where each one of these locations are. If you don't have pictures, if you don't have text files, if you don't have databases, that's fine. You don't need to worry about it. But if you're not sure if you're using those, then you want to track down and find out. Go to your old software and look at how it was looking. Look at where it was looking. Copy those files over and make sure this batch converter knows where those files are located, because if it doesn't, you're not going to get a successful conversion. Now there's a checkbox down here on the bottom left-hand corner that says copy all dependent files before conversion. What this means is that when it converts, it's going to copy all of these files over to the new locations before it starts converting the labels. Why would that be important? Well, you might have something like a database, and in the database defines which picture to use. So the database could be defining a whole array of different pictures. But the actual label file itself doesn't say this picture or that picture. It just says, look at the database will tell it. So if you don't copy all the dependent files, the label won't know to tell it to copy over all those pictures because it doesn't have a direct link to those pictures. It has a link to the database, and the database is linked to the pictures. So this is kind of a nitty-gritty kind of thing where you may or may not need to do it, but usually it's not a bad idea to say copy all the dependent files before conversion. The only downside is because it copies all those files over, it can take a little bit longer. Now I know for example that I don't necessarily need this stuff right now. I don't need everything to copy first, so I'm going to uncheck it for my conversion just to make things move along a little bit quicker. But if your time isn't a factor for you, if it's okay that you can spend a little extra time, and we're not talking hours, we're talking a few extra minutes, go ahead and leave that checked just to be safe. Okay, so these are the linked files in the old software, where the old software was looking. Now we're going to hit back, and we're going to see new location of linked files. Now, in the new version of the new software doesn't depend so heavily on these external file locations. Okay, pictures can now be embedded in the label. Paragraph fields can be part of the label. It doesn't depend on these files to be held externally in some specific location. However, if you want it to, there are specific locations like images, queries, describers, data files. These are the locations in the new software. So if you do a conversion and you specifically tell it, hey, I wanted to convert in a manner that's going to keep this as an external file, this is where it's going to put those files. Again, you want these files to match, or I'm sorry, these paths to match whatever the definition is in the new version of LabelView. There is a reset all button here that does the exact same thing that the location of linked files, the old location of linked files, does. It looks at the new version of the software and automatically pulls those paths over. You don't usually want to change these manually unless you know you're going to plan on going into the software and changing the software at a later date to match the paths that you define here. You kind of always want this to match the software. Otherwise, when you do the conversion, it might put files in locations that you define, but then the software doesn't know to look in those locations. So hitting the reset all button here really is kind of a good idea because it'll make sure everything gets put in the right location for the purposes of the software. Okay, so those two aspects are actually very important. This first one, really, really important. Now, moving down here, we do have a miscellaneous options. Miscellaneous options is kind of I guess a catch-all for any kind of little options features here and there that you may want to select. Okay, really, as a rule, I don't recommend coming in here and playing around with this too much. Okay, there are for the purposes of an accurate conversion, it starts off with the checkboxes checked to define it to define a conversion that's going to be as accurate as possible to the original label design. So it'll look as similarly as possible to what it did in the old software when it's converted into the new software. The only possible variant that I sometimes deselect is this first checkbox. It says convert paragraph with fixed data source, but with exactly the same line breaks as LabelView 8 in earlier versions. This means in version 8, paragraphs of information on a label were stored in an external file. Okay, and that's where those location of linked files come into play. Okay, it's stored in this external file, and when it does the conversion, what checking this checkbox is going to do is it's going to take it out of that file and put it in the label and make it have the same line breaks as it did in the original version of the software. I'm sorry, in the original version of the label. Okay, sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. Where it's bad is if people depend on the fact that it's stored in an external file. A lot of people depend on keeping that information in an external file because they'll have an ingredients list, and that ingredients list is used in 50 labels. If they need to change the ingredients, they change it in one file and it changes all 50 other labels at once. If you check this checkbox, it's going to stop using that external file, and they would have to change it in each and every individual label file. So this is the one checkbox I sometimes uncheck because it gives more of a similar feel to the way it was in the older versions of the software. Okay. Other options, again, you can pick and choose. There's features in here for how it's going to convert, missing printers if it's going to install missing printer drivers. Show warnings if it's a Windows printer driver because it can't convert Windows drivers. It can only convert R drivers. But really, as a rule, most of these you kind of want to leave the way they are. Okay. Last but not least is a messages option. Now, the messages option is an area where you can come in and choose what error messages should be important and what messages should just be notifications or warnings or actually listed as errors. This is where you can come through and really get specific about what does and does not constitute an issue as far as you're concerned. Now, there are specific messaging strengths that you can choose from, either strong, moderate, or weak, meaning strong, it's going to be really strict. Even little things are going to show up as actual errors and prevent the conversion. A moderate is just kind of a mid-level, and then weak says, hey, I want it to convert even if there's some small problems here and there. It starts off, I think, as moderate. If you want to go to weak, you can choose it. If you want to go to strong, you can choose that there. It'll just automatically go through. Otherwise, you can come through and pick and choose if you want to actually change something manually. Okay. All right, so those are all of the conversion options. This is, again, a very, very important screen, so it's important to go through these and make sure that you're addressing any options that you need to address. But once this is covered, we've covered all the bases. We've chosen where they come from with the sources, which specific labels we want to convert, where we want to send them to, and then the options that are related to it. The last step is, of course, going to the Processing tab. Going to the Processing tab is actually going to start the conversion. And this can take a few seconds, sometimes 30 seconds or more, depending on the complexity of the label for each label. You can see it's ticking through and going through each label here, and actually most of them are converting successfully, so that's a good thing. See if anything comes up. Okay, there's a warning. Okay, a warning is just an issue saying, hey, there's something different, something you might want to check. It's not necessarily a problem. It didn't come across something that said, okay, we shouldn't convert this label, but it's something that, hey, you should know about and we're going to tell you about. Errors would be a little red exclamation point. You can see up here, little red circle with an exclamation point in it. I don't have any. If it's an error, it doesn't actually convert. It stops the conversion of that label. Okay. If you want to see how everything converted, you can expand it and it'll tell you everything about the conversion. It does say that printer settings are converted from native printer from a native printer and will be converted to limited or default. Native printers existed in the old software. Now the only thing that really exists is what used to be known as extended drivers, so it has to convert it into that extended driver. That's all that's saying. Now, the warning here, let's see here, the nutrition, okay, most everything converted okay. It looks like there's just one thing, paragraph field, that's giving a warning. It's saying font size may be different, paragraph converted with changes. Now, it doesn't actually tell us what's different. It's just saying, hey, we noticed that there's a difference in the paragraph field, so you're going to want to look at it and make sure everything's okay. Okay, so, well, that's a good thing. I mean, everything seemed to go pretty smoothly. We got a couple warnings, so we're going to want to take a look at them, but everything converted successfully. All right, from here, we're going to want to go ahead and select the first label on the list and click the button down here that says Preview and Approve Labels. Now, when we do this, up comes a window that gives us a side-by-side comparison of the two labels. Okay. Now, you might ask, okay, why do we have to approve labels? Well, because there's a chance that a label could have changed in appearance. And because the appearance of a label for some industries is very, very important, we need to basically notify all conversion anyone who's doing a conversion that there's this possibility there could be a difference, and you need to look at it and acknowledge that it looks okay for you and that it can be printed. Otherwise, if it was different and we didn't say something and a label got sent out that was incorrect, we would be responsible. So there's a requirement that you have to say, I looked at this label and it looks good. Now, this comparison window right here is the quickest way to do that. So if you've got a lot of labels, you're going to want to do it from here. You can see a side-by-side. Left side is the original version 8 label. Right side is the newly converted 2012 label. And you can look at them. They look fairly similar. Now, there is a little bit of font difference. In some cases, that has to do with the conversion of the printer. It's a different printer driver, so it's selecting a different font, or it's displaying a font a little bit differently. If it looks okay, if that's all right, you can approve it. If not, you can always hit the edit button and go in and change things if you need to. This one looks okay, so I'm going to approve it. That one looks, looks like the barcode's a little different, but it looks okay. Hit approve. Now, you might see things here and there where it looks different, like here you see a little box, here you see an actual picture. This is just a difference in the way that it displayed in version 8 versus version 2012. It's actually doing it correctly. It's just a difference in the way it looks, and it's showing you how it's going to look in a new version versus the old version. Realistically, this is actually the same thing. So, still approving. See if we can get through. Again, you see different results here. It's just because of the way it's handling in this case, this is what is it called? A when printed field. And when printed fields used to use these A, B, C, D, E, F, G placeholders, and now they actually have content whenever possible. So Even though it looks a little different, it is still converted in the same form. Same thing here. Same thing there. You know, we're just kind of ticking through. Okay, here's one that has a warning. You can see here it's saying there is a warning, and this is the one I think that said there was a problem or a change to the paragraph field. And you can see there is actually it's slightly different line breaks. You know, this is kind of what we mean by, you know, a warning isn't necessarily a problem. It's just kind of a notification. You know, it is different, but you know, for my purposes, this isn't something that's actually a problem. It's just a real minor change. So it's okay. I can just say, you know what, that's fine. Approve that. Same thing here. Looking good. Everything's looking pretty good here. So, I mean, you can kind of tick through and just approve and approve and approve. And if everything's looking like it's going okay, you can just hit approve really quickly and just get through everything. Okay, we do see a difference here. Okay, it says, you know, the label group demonstrates how to accumulate significantly different font size here. Now, this is kind of what we were saying, that a good success rate, but every once in a while you'll come across something that isn't quite right. And that's where you can hit this edit button. Okay, hitting the edit button is going to go ahead and launch LabelView 2012 for me. Okay, it's going to say, hey, this label hasn't been approved yet. That's okay, I know that. That's why I'm launching it. All right, I need to change this font. Okay, it looks like that it's using a fit to frame feature here. So I'm going to turn off fit to frame. And then I'm also going to turn my font down to say like a size 8. All right, made the changes I needed. Go ahead and close it. Say, are you sure you want to? Yep, I want to save it. Going to reconvert it right away, and there we go. We look good. Again, we can just say, go ahead and approve that. And there we go. We're back to the beginning. This has already been approved, so I can't approve it anymore. We're done approving all our labels. I can hit close, and you see little green check marks next to each label. And that's it. We've now gone through all of our labels. Our labels are converted, and they're ready to be used in the new version of the software. If I were to bring up, let's see here on my desktop, where is that file? Samples. There you go. You can see all of the label files that I just converted ready for use. All right, it does create a BAK file and an LBAL file. BAK file is kind of a backup just in case you make a change here and you didn't realize you wanted to make the change, just still the backup of the old file. Right? So that's it. That is going through a successful conversion of the label designs. You know, I went through and just did a few labels at this point, and that's kind of what we were saying before. I just did a few. Everything went pretty good here. You know, I know all my settings are good, so I can jump back to the source tab, rescan, and select all of my label files. And when I do all my label files, all the settings will be set up for me already the way I want them to be, and I can get back over to this processing tab and convert all of the remaining labels. Now, you know, if you have hundreds of labels, you saw it takes a couple seconds per label. So it can sometimes, if you got a lot of labels, it can take an hour or two, or even more, depending on how many labels we're talking about. And then the process of approving each label is quickest done right through this preview and approve button. So you know, it is a process. There is several steps involved with this, so you're going to want to, you know, take your time, make sure that you're going through, checking all the settings, and designating enough time for this conversion process to take place. This is where we come back and we say, you know, make sure that you are, you know, keeping that old version, that old system in place, in operating until you get through this conversion process and you make sure that everything came through the way you wanted it to. So, all right, so lots of information covered there. You know, we did go through, again, just to recap, covering where the files are coming from, which labels specifically we need, where the labels are going to, checking the specific settings, the location of linked files, and some specific settings. Very important. Remember that part. And then, of course, the processing tab, which means convert those labels. So I can then go in and preview and approve each one of those labels. So, all right. that is the batch label converter process. One little thing that I do want to point out is that, there is this label view batch converter does allow you to convert from label view, say label view 8 into label view 2012, but it also exists and allows you to convert from, say, label view 8 into CodeSoft 2012. So the label view batch converter is not just into label view, it's actually into CodeSoft as well. But the process for converting into label view as well as converting into CodeSoft is exactly the same. So everything that you just learned here can be applied if you were doing a conversion into the CodeSoft software instead of the conversion into the label view software. So, all right, great. Well, I hope this was helpful. I hope that it gives you a better idea of the specific process that you want to follow, and to prepare a little bit, and keep in mind that you want to keep that old environment in place until you know that you get through this process and everything looks successful. So, I want to thank everyone for joining me, and everyone have a wonderful day. Thank you very much.